Hello everyone, I'm here to share with you a study that harnesses spatial big data to have a better understanding of how neighborhood influence social well-being. We all know that the individual is never alone, it's always embedded in something bigger, be that the family or the neighborhood. Right? Understanding neighborhood will be important to understand how we experience well-being or different indicators of well-being. So this example above shows the feet of pigeons without toes. Right, and you tend to see more of that in places that's close to a high concentration of hair salons. And this happens because when the pigeon fly over areas with high concentration of hair salons, when they land, their feet may get trapped right in the gutters together with hairballs. Right, so the hairballs, when they take off, right, the hairball will just pull out the toenails, and as a result, you see a lot of pigeons without toes. Right, so now similar findings can be said about humans, but in context of obesity. So if you live closer to convenience stores, for instance, you have a higher obesity rate for the neighborhood. And what that says is basically the convenient access to certain features, amenities, shape your behavior, and in this case is diet. Now, the evidence for neighborhood and health is actually very well established, right? So in privileged or advantaged neighborhoods, you tend to observe a lower extent of drug abuse and improve health, right, among adults, right? And this effect is not it interacts with the individual differences, right? So in this case, income, for example, low income families actually demonstrate better physical and mental health living in higher income neighborhoods, ostensibly because the high income neighborhood actually has this protective psychological buffer, where they feel that they have a more comprehensive social support, right, among the higher income neighborhoods. Now, the reverse is can be said about high income individuals, right? So high income individuals are less likely to be depressed if they live in low income communities, right? And ostensibly because of the social comparison effect, so they feel better off living among low income communities. There is quite a bit of work done in terms of built environment, right? So looking at biophilia effect, and generally speaking, if you live closer to parks, right, you actually have a more positive sense of well-being, right? Because that kind of promote healing and rejuvenation. And similarly, it can be said about any kind of facilities that promote social interactions. Generally speaking, it kind of encourage or empowered individual to become more mobile and to interact with other residents in the proximity. The research in terms of social diversity or ethnic diversity is actually quite clear, right? So the work by Putnam, for example, shows that in neighborhoods with a higher ethnic diversity, generally you have weaker social bonding. Now, the effect is somewhat mixed when it comes to migrants. So places with a high concentration of migrant community actually shows stronger kinship ties. So that kind of brings us to the case of Singapore, which is interesting because a very significant proportion of residents in Singapore are non-citizens or migrants, both long-term and what we want to do here is to understand how that neighborhood texture kind of interact or shape the perceptions of diversity as well as well-being. And we look at neighborhood in the context of class, racial, and immigrant segment. So not all neighborhoods are wealthier than the others, are more affluent, right? So housing resale price typically is the proxy that we use to understand SES, right? And in terms of racial and immigrant, we can do something similar, right? We can see which are the apartments where there's a higher concentration of the different ethnic groups. And here you see these are the locations where there's a greater concentration of ethnic Chinese, which is a majority group, ethnic majority in. These are locations for ethnic Malay, which is a minority, and similarly for ethnic Indian. For migrant, right? So these are the areas where with a high concentration of immigrant household, right? So we can convert the spatial data to come kind of a kernel density, right? And that allows us to extract a value for every neighborhood, right? In terms of the different social and to see how that interactively affect their perceptions of multicultural rejection or multicultural inclusion, if you like, social trust and life satisfaction, right? As a function of immigrant density, minority density, SES, right, and proximity to parks and community clubs, right? These are shared spaces that promote social. And the results show that lower multicultural rejection tend to be associated with residential areas with higher migrant density. higher social trust associated with areas with higher migrant density or areas with a lower racial minority density, and higher life satisfaction is associated with areas with lower ethnic minority density. Right, there is a couple of interactions here, right, and proximity to community clubs, shared spaces, only support multicultural rejection or mitigate multicultural rejection if you are among immigrant locations, neighborhoods with high immigrant density, right? So that's the upward slope, right? Solid. Now, on the other hand, there's something about immigrant density and ethnic minority density which interact to shape perception of trust. So places where both densities are high, immigrant and ethnic minority, right, trust tend to be lowest. Similarly, in the context of life satisfaction, right, you have the same effect. So locations with higher immigrant density and higher ethnic minority density, life satisfaction. Right, so this is the hotspots for the three. And in conclusion, geographical differences do augment some of the individual level experiences. Interestingly, class doesn't seem to affect inclusion or well-being. And it's important to understand how that social contour, the neighbor contour shapes well-being so that the findings can be calibrated further. Thank you.